my sugar. Welcome back, everybody. It is Monday, July 13th, 2026. And we left off on 1 Peter 3, verse 1. Likewise, wives, be subject to your own husbands, so that even if some do not obey the word, they may be won without a word by the conduct of their wives. When they see your respectful and pure conduct, do not let your adorning be external, the braiding of hair and the putting on of gold jewelry, or the clothing you wear. The braiding of hair or the clothing you wear. But let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart, with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious. For this is how the holy women who hoped in God used to adorn themselves, by submitting to their own husbands, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. And you are her children, if you do good and do not fear anything that is frightening. Likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel, since they are heirs with you of the grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered. What does this mean? What is this saying about the receipt of prayers and its relationship to how we treat women? Oops. My wife may want to hear about this. This passage connects a husband's spiritual life directly to how he treats his wife, making the relationship a prerequisite for effective prayer. Here is what the verse is saying about the relationship broken down into its core points. Number one, God filters prayers through personal relationships. The phrase, so that your prayers may not be hindered, is a direct warning. In the biblical context, it implies that God does not evaluate a person's spiritual devotion in a vacuum. A husband cannot be in a right relationship with God if he is treating his wife poorly. Dang. Fair, though. If he is harsh, dismissive, or dishonoring toward her, it creates a spiritual barrier, causing his prayers to be ineffective or unanswered. Wow. Well, I better treat my wife right. Not that I don't, but I think that's really interesting because I totally missed that on the first read through. That's really interesting. Okay, I saved that. I'm gonna have to show her that later. Okay, let's go back. Second, live with understanding and honor. To prevent prayers from being blocked, the verse gives two specific actions. Live with your wives in an understanding way. This means being considerate, paying attention to her needs, and knowing her deeply rather than being harsh or indifferent. Showing honor. This requires valuing and respecting her, actively lifting her up rather than looking down on her. Dang. Okay. Make each other better. Got it. Good. That's good. All right. The weaker vessel and spiritual equality. The passage provides two reasons why she must be treated this way. Balancing physical realities with spiritual status. The weaker vessel. In the ancient world, this primarily referred to physical vulnerability. Men generally having more physical power and societal authority at the time. The verse argues that because she may be physically or socially more vulnerable, a husband must never use his strength to manipulate, overpower, or mistreat her. Instead, he must protect and cherish her. equal heirs. Lest anyone think weaker implies inferior worth, the verse immediately balances it by stating women are heirs with you of the grace of life. Before God, men and women possess equal spiritual status, value, and inheritance of eternal life. Okay. The verse teaches that spiritual maturity cannot be separated from relational integrity. A man's claim to love or serve God is put to the test by how he treats his wife in the privacy of his home. If he fails to honor her as an equal partner, his communication with God is cut off. Dang. Does this speak to Paul's reasoning when he says that some men should just remain single? In other words, if they weren't ready to give this much to a relationship, it would be better that they remain single so that they are not cut off from God. I think it was Paul that said that. That is a fascinating connection, and it actually aligns perfectly with the core of the New Testament's view on marriage, but with a slightly different emphasis than being cut off. When Paul talks about singleness, most famously in 1 Corinthians 7, his reasoning isn't so much about the fear of failing at marriage and angering God, but rather about the sheer amount of divided attention marriage requires. That's true, he did say that. The burden of divided interest. Paul explicitly states that marriage changes a person's focus. He writes, "The unmarried man is anxious about the things of the Lord, how to please the Lord, but the married man is anxious." The unmarried man is anxious about the things of the Lord, how to please the Lord, but the married man is anxious about worldly things, how to please his wife, and his interests are divided. Peter's verse shows us exactly why those interests are divided. Peter establishes that you cannot just ignore your wife to go pray. Caring for your wife is part of your service to God. Therefore, a married man has to expend immense energy, time, and emotional labor to live understandingly and honorably with his wife. If a man isn't ready for that workload, his spiritual life will suffer. So this is interesting to me because there's also a flip side of it, right? Which this is probably, I'm just going to say it, but it's not very, it doesn't sound great to say, but I'm just going to say it because it's the other side of things. The contrast would be that if a man finds himself struggling with wanting romance in his life, or perhaps he finds somebody that he is really taken with, he now has to weigh the distraction of desire to fornicate versus marriage where he can have sex with his wife without sin. If that makes sense. In other words, there's always a trade-off because obviously men have needs. You have hit on the exact tension Paul wrestles with in 1 Corinthians 7. It is essentially a spiritual and psychological cost-benefit analysis. Paul creates a spectrum between two competing realities for a man who is drawn toward romance and sex. So one, the threat of fornication, high risk. Paul is a realist. He recognizes that sexual desire is an incredibly powerful force. If a man chooses to stay single, but lacks the supernatural gift of celibacy, that burning desire changes from a minor distraction into an overwhelming spiritual hazard. Paul famously writes, "But if they cannot exercise self-control, they should marry, for it is better to marry than to burn with passion." In this state, The single man isn't actually undivided in his devotion to God. Instead, he is totally consumed by the struggle against temptation. The distraction of unmet desire and the risk of falling into sexual sin, fornication, becomes a much greater threat to his relationship with God than the standard responsibilities of marriage. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. Okay. Second, the calculated risk, the weight of marriage. If that man chooses to marry to avoid sin, I can really relate to this exact situation here. If that man chooses to marry to avoid sin, he solves the problem of burning with passion, but he immediately inherits the reality Peter talks about, the massive responsibility to live in an understanding way and honor his wife. And that's not to say that you can't live and be happy. I mean, I am happy. I'm very happy with my wife. I'm very well pleased with her, and I think she with me. But it is a massive responsibility, and it's there's a certain burden to it that just isn't there when you're not married. I don't know how else to explain it, but it's a different level of burden. Being completely responsible for another person, for supporting another person. But yeah, I guess what am I trying to say? It's not the same though as, it's not a negative thing, but there is a weight to it. So I like that framing, the weight of marriage. It's a burden you have to carry, but that doesn't mean that you can't, carry it with a smile on your face. And it doesn't mean that you're not thankful for it. Absence of burden, any burden, doesn't always equate to your life being better, I guess, if that makes any sense. Because then what's the alternative, right? Loneliness and fornication and sin and empty sexual encounters and going to hell. There's everything's a trade-off. So that's all I got to say about that. Verse 8, finally, all of you have unity of mind, sympathy, brotherly love, a tender heart, and a humble mind. Do not repay evil for evil or reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, bless, for to this you were called, that you may obtain a blessing. For whoever desires to love life and see good days, let him keep his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking deceit. Let him turn away from evil and do good. Let him seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are open to their prayer. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. What is this from? I assume this is a psalm, but maybe not. What is this quoting? Psalm 34, 12 through 16. Okay, I'll have to remember that. Psalm 34, 12 through 16. Okay. It sent me back one. Verse 13. Now who is there to harm you if you are zealous? Actually, let's read that again. For whoever desires to love life and see good days, let him keep his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking deceit. Let him turn away from evil and do good. Let him seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are open to their prayer. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. Now who is there to harm you if you are zealous for what is good? But even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you will be blessed. Have no fear of them, nor be troubled. But in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect, having a good conscience, so that when you are slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Christ may be put to shame. For it is better to suffer for doing good, if that should be God's will, than for doing evil. For Christ also suffered once for sins, but the righteous for the unrighteous. For Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit, in which he went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison, because they formerly did not obey, when God's patience waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is, 8 persons, were brought safely through water. Well, hold on. Being put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit, in which he went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison. To the spirits in prison. Who is that? I love these, what do they call it? Sheol, Hades type references. I think they're so interesting. Who are these spirits and where are they? The identity of the spirits in prison mentioned in 1 Peter 3:19 is one of the most debated topics in New Testament studies. Because the passage is brief and uses language not found elsewhere in the Bible, scholars have developed 3 primary interpretations. Each view offers a different understanding of who these spirits are and where they are located. So first, the fallen angels view. This view suggests that the spirits are fallen angels who sinned during the time of Noah, often linked to the sons of God described in Genesis 6, 1-4. So who they are: supernatural angelic beings who rebelled against God. Where they are: in a state of confinement or prison, sometimes specifically identified as Tartarus, a term used in 2 Peter 2:4 for the place of judgment for fallen angels. The proclamation. In this interpretation, Christ's proclamation, the Greek word charisio, or charisso, literally means to herald or announce. So Christ's announcement, not necessarily to preach the gospel, is a declaration of victory. Wait. So what's it saying? Okay. The proclamation. In this interpretation, Christ's announcement is a declaration of victory. After his resurrection, Christ announced his triumph over the powers of evil to these imprisoned demonic spirits. So I'm not trying to be glib or be funny necessarily, but in a way, just to put it in terms I can understand, I'm going to ask the question. So in point number 1, for lack of a better term, are you saying Jesus went down to Tartarus to troll the imprisoned angels and let them know that he won, even though they weren't getting out one way or the other? Or was their fate up in the air up until this point? Maybe that's why he did that. I gotta fix it. Tartarus. Or was their, not their fate up in the air up until this point? Put in those exact terms, yes, that is pretty much what the fallen angels view argues, though theologians usually call it a declaration of victory rather than a victory lap. To answer your second question, no, their fate was never up in the air. According to this perspective, their doom was already sealed when they rebelled back in the days of Noah. Jesus didn't go down there to change their sentence, offer them a second chance, or hold a trial. Instead, the proclamation, or rather the announcement, based off what they said that word means, charisso, meaning to herald an official announcement, was the ultimate "it is finished" statement. It's pretty G. Here is how that dynamic breaks down under this view. In Jewish thought of that era, heavily influenced by texts like 1st Enoch, which the New Testament writers were familiar with, these specific fallen angels rebelled by trying to corrupt humanity, thinking they could derail God's plan. The cosmic announcement, by dying and rising again, Jesus proved that their plan had completely failed. The cosmic order was restored and evil was defeated. Okay, so I mean, that would be a reason to go down and let them know. Okay. Why, quote unquote, troll them? The purpose wasn't just petty gloating. It was an official legal notice to the spiritual forces of darkness that their authority was permanently broken. Peter actually uses this point to comfort his readers. He is telling early Christians who were being persecuted by powerful human rulers, don't worry, Jesus just went to the deepest, darkest prison in the cosmos and told the most terrifying rebel spirits in history that he won. If they can't touch him, your earthly persecutors can't either. So, while it sounds a bit like a cosmic victory lap, in theological terms, it was the official cosmic announcement that the war was won, even if the final cleanup of the battlefield was still to come. That's pretty gnarly. That's cool. Okay, very interesting. Verse 20. Because they formerly did not obey when God's patience waited in the days of Noah. Actually, let me just save this whole. Green. All right. Verse 20. Because they formerly did not obey when God's patience waited in the days of Noah while the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is, 8 persons, were brought safely through water. Baptism, which corresponds to this, now saves you, not as a removal of dirt from the body, but as an appeal to God for a good conscience, through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who has gone into heaven and is at the right hand of God, with angels, authorities, and powers having been subjected to him. 1 Peter 4. Since therefore Christ suffered in the flesh, arm yourselves with the same way of thinking, for whoever has suffered in the flesh has ceased from sin, so as to live for the rest of the time in the flesh, no longer for human passions, but for the will of God. For the time that is past suffices for doing what the Gentiles want to do, living in sensuality, passions, drunkenness, orgies, drinking parties, and lawless idolatry. With respect to this, they are surprised when you do not join them in the same flood of debauchery, and they malign you. But they will give account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. For this is why the gospel was preached even to those who are dead, that though judged in the flesh the way people are, they might live in the spirit the way God does. Wait, what? For this is why the gospel was preached even to those who are dead, that though judged in the flesh the way people are, they might live in the spirit the way God does. The end of all things is at hand. Therefore, be self-controlled and sober-minded for the sake of your prayers. Above all, keep loving one another earnestly, since love covers a multitude of sins. Show hospitality to one another without grumbling. As each has received a gift, use it to serve one another as good stewards of God's varied grace. Whoever speaks as one who speaks oracles of God, whoever serves as one who serves by the strength that God supplies, in order that in everything God may be glorified through Jesus Christ. To him belong glory and dominion forever and ever. Amen. Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery trial when it comes upon you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you. But rejoice insofar as you share Christ's sufferings, that you may also rejoice and be glad when his glory is revealed. If you are insulted for the name of Christ, you are blessed, because the Spirit of glory and of God rest upon you. But let none of you suffer as a murderer or a thief or an evildoer or as a meddler. Yet if anyone suffers as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify God in that name. For it is time for judgment to begin at the household of God. And if it begins with us, what will be the outcome for those who do not obey the gospel of God? And if the righteous is scarcely saved, what will become of the ungodly and the sinner? Therefore, let those who suffer according to God's will entrust their souls to a faithful Creator while doing good. First Peter 5. So I exhort the elders among you, as a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, as well as a partaker in the glory that is going to be revealed. Shepherd the flock of God that is among you, exercising oversight, not under compulsion, but willingly, as God would have you, not for shameful gain, but eagerly, not domineering over those in your charge, but being examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the unfading crown of glory. Likewise, you who are younger, be subject to the elders. Clothe yourselves, all of you, with humility toward one another. For God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time he may exalt you, casting all your anxieties on him, because he cares for you. With regard to anxieties, what does this say about how our posture should be when talking to God and what our prayers can be about in terms of scope and scale within our daily lives? Is there anything that is beneath God that troubles us that we should not include in our prayers? I often have that thought, so I wanted to ask, because I think it's interesting that I don't think that there is, but it's hard to get over, I think, initially. At least it was for me. Even though that's kind of hard to say out loud, but I guess for lack of a better term, I was embarrassed even to pray about certain things because it's just kind of like, why am I bothering God with this, you know? Based on this passage from 1 Peter, the Bible paints a incredibly reassuring picture of how we can approach God with the things that stress us out. It directly answers your questions about your posture, the scale of your prayers, and whether anything is too small for God. Here is a breakdown of what this text tells us. First, our posture, active humility and trust. The passage starts by telling us to humble ourselves under the mighty hand of God. The mighty hand is a classic biblical symbol for God's ultimate power and ability to deliver. Your posture shouldn't be one of trying to fix everything yourself or demanding things on your own timeline. True humility here isn't about beating yourself up. It's about acknowledging that you are small, He is big, and you can trust His timing so that at the proper time He may exalt you. The act of casting. The word used for casting means to violently throw or fling something onto something else, like throwing a heavy pack off your back onto a pack animal. Your posture in prayer is meant to be an active, intentional transfer of weight. You are taking the heavy burden off your shoulders and tossing it onto His. So what is the scope and scale? It's absolutely everything. When it comes to the scale of your daily life, the text uses a very deliberate word, all. It says, casting all your anxieties on Him. This means the scope of your prayers is completely wide open. It encompasses the massive, life-altering worries, health crises, financial ruin, the future of your family, just as much as the quiet, repetitive friction of daily life. Is anything beneath God? The short answer based on this text is a resounding no. There is absolutely nothing that troubles you that is too small, trivial, or petty to bring to God. The text gives the ultimate reason why, because He cares for you. Think about it through the lens of a loving parent. If a toddler is crying because their favorite toy's wheel fell off, a good parent doesn't dismiss them because, in the grand scheme of the universe, a plastic wheel doesn't matter. The parent cares because the child cares. God's willingness to listen to your prayers isn't scaled to the objective importance of the problem. It is scaled to His love for you. If it affects your peace, if it weighs on your mind, if it disrupts your day, He wants to hear about it. Treating a worry as too small for God is actually a subtle form of pride. Dang, I never thought about it that way. Treating a worry as too small for God is actually a subtle form of pride, because it implies you think you should just handle it on your own. In other words, you don't need to filter your prayers or present a curated list of truly important, quote unquote, truly important problems to God. Your daily posture can simply be, Lord, I can't carry this specific weight today, so I am throwing it onto you because I know you care about me. That's beautiful. Wow, I didn't expect that, but that was a good answer. That was so good. I think we would just, since we've hit our mark for tonight, we'll start back over on 1 Peter 5. I just want to read it again tomorrow. So we'll pick it up on 1 Peter 5, verse 1 tomorrow. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to drop a sub, share it with a friend. God bless you guys, and good night.